I traveled to 10 years later. The gentle young man who once loved me deeply. Now he is a hotshot business tycoon. He is good in every way. But when he looks at me, there is no surprise or joy in his eyes. Only empty indifference and hatred are left. Everyone says that I should pay with my life for Vance. I reunited with Vance at a dinner party. He is now the most influential figure in the business circle. Just standing there casually. His cold and noble temperament is unparalleled. As people clinked glasses and exchanged toasts, he received the congratulations of everyone present. Someone teased, "I heard that President Aurora is going to get engaged soon." Congratulations. Vance didn't respond, but his expression softened for a moment. He raised his eyes and glanced casually. And the smile on his face suddenly froze. He saw me. The sharpness in his eyes flashed. I had nowhere to hide, and I waved my hand with a bitter smile. "Vance. Long time no see." I was dragged into the corner of the banquet hall by Vance. He clamped my chin. And his cold gaze fell on my face like a sharp blade. "Who sent you here? Who allowed you to have plastic surgery to look like this?" He was angry. When Vance was 19, he would calm down as long as I gave him a gentle hug. But now, I curled my fingers tightly by my legs. And the soreness in my chest tightened as well. "Vance. It's me, hateful for my obsession. Aurora." He immediately released his hand, as if he had touched something dirty. With a look of defense and disgust, "Go back and tell the person behind you to come up with a fresher trick next time." He turned and left. He went back to the table and continued to chat and laugh with the guests. I stood there blankly in the corner. It felt as if my heart was being pricked by fine needles over and over again, and it ached densely. I raised my arm and wiped my tears randomly, then lowered my head and carried the plate into the back kitchen. Until the dinner party ended, my hands were soaked and wrinkled by the dishwashing liquid. The foreman distributed part-time wages to everyone. I wiped my hands and asked cautiously if I could get the money in cash. The foreman frowned. "Where can I get cash for you now?" "What about the QR code? I'll scan it and transfer the money to you." I've only been in this time and space for half a month, and I've observed that most people use that kind of QR code to buy things. But I stared at the tip of my shoe uneasily. "Sorry. I don't have a mobile phone." "Where did you come from? Some poor and remote place? You don't even have a mobile phone." The foreman mumbled and dug into his pocket, taking out a red banknote. "This is all I have. Just 100 yuan. Take it or leave it." "Thank you." I took the money with both hands. Just as I was about to go to the back kitchen to get my coat. When I looked up, I saw Vance standing at the corner. He was silent, and I didn't know how long he had been standing there watching. An unprecedented sense of embarrassment overwhelmed me from head to toe. I took to my heels and ran. The cold wind on the street blew into my nose and eyes. A black car stopped beside me. The car window rolled down, revealing half of Vance's profile hidden in the darkness. "Get in," he said briefly. "Get in the car. Don't make me repeat it." I bit my lip and got into the car. Vance asked casually, "Where do you live now?" I lowered my head shyly. "At the 24-hour convenience store. Sometimes I make do for a night on a park bench." Afraid that he wouldn't believe me, I rolled up my sleeve, revealing a scar on my forearm. It was left by a car accident when I was 10 years old. At that time, Vance helped me to avoid a truck with a failed brake. His left leg was broken, and he was in a wheelchair for months. "Vance. I'm really Aurora. I don't know why I came to 10 years later." My throat was dry. "I'm not lying to you." "Yeah. I know. Put your sleeve down," he said calmly. Such a cold reaction. It seemed that he was not the same person who had pinched my chin with red eyes not long ago. Did he really believe me? The air in the car was quiet. After crossing 10 years, I finally met someone I could trust. I couldn't hold back the questions in my heart anymore. "Vance, can you tell me what happened in these 10 years? I'm here now. So where did the me in this time and space go?" Vance turned his head, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. "Haven't you gone back to take a look?" I shook my head. "I can't go back. I don't have an ID card, and I can't buy a ticket. I also don't have enough money." Vance stared silently at the receding scenery outside the window. In the dim and silent night, he spoke without any joy or sorrow. Dead. I was taken to Vance's home. It was an ordinary two-bedroom apartment, but it was decorated very warmly. With his status now, I thought he would at least live in a luxurious villa like the ones in novels. I hesitated at the door for a moment. Vance twitched the corner of his mouth. Don't you like this place? It's better than sleeping in the park, right? I didn't dislike it. I quickly stepped inside. Vance. Thank you for willing to take me in. The moment I pushed open the door of the guest room, I was stunned. The room was decorated in a pink style, full of girlish hearts. There were even a lot of expensive cosmetics and jewelry placed on the table. At a glance, it was a girl's room. Even in the wardrobe, there were beautiful and delicate dresses hanging. The white light shone on the floor tiles, reflecting my embarrassed appearance. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the room. Vance was leaning against the balcony smoking. Hearing the noise, he turned his head and looked at me. The light of the cigarette between his fingers flickered on and off, just like the obscure look in his eyes. What's wrong? Don't you like the room? I can just sleep on the sofa in the living room, I said in a hoarse voice. That's your fiancée's room, isn't it? It's not appropriate for me to live there. Fiancée? Vance sneered. Do you want to know what happened in these 10 years? He skillfully flicked off the ash between his fingers, and his cold and indifferent gaze fell on me wantonly. Take off your clothes, and I'll tell you. I was so frightened that I froze. There was no lust in his eyes. He coldly wiped away the tears hanging under my eyelids. If you can't even stand this, how dare you come back with me? I held his fingers, and tears fell uncontrollably. Vance. I'm scared. The grievances and panic that I had been holding back since I was brought to 10 years later seemed to burst out all at once at this moment. I hoped that the Vance in front of me could comfort me gently like he used to. But he pushed me away, grabbed the blanket beside him and threw it roughly on my head. Go to the room. I don't want to. I pulled off the blanket and stubbornly looked Vance in the eye. After not seeing each other for 10 years, Vance has another girlfriend. I just can't accept this. What's more, he asked me to live in his fiancée's room? Vance stared at me with his dark eyes, with no trace of emotion in them. Go and sleep in the room next door. Or sleep on the street. His tone was fierce and harsh. I gave in and got into Vance's room with the blanket in my arms. After all, the experience of sleeping in the park was really not good. The overall decoration of his room was in dark colors. Even with the lights on, it was as gloomy as a haunted house. There was nothing in the room except a bed. It was completely different from the Vance I remembered. I even suspected that I had traveled into a parallel universe. But the remaining smell on the quilt was the same as that on Vance. It was the faint smell of mint and grapefruit body wash, which was the birthday gift I gave to Vance. I didn't sleep well that night. I had too many questions in my heart. So when the knock on the door sounded, I ran out without even putting on my shoes. When I opened the door, both the person outside the door and I were stunned at the same time. Aurora? She blurted out. And soon frowned. Who are you? Why are you here? The person in front of me was Ivy, my best friend in high school. Finally, heading fulfilled right sigh. I met a familiar person. I reached out to touch her hand with red eyes. Ivy. Before I could finish my words, Vance came back. He naturally put his arm around Ivy's waist and sat down on the sofa, lighting a cigarette. My blood seemed to freeze in an instant, and I stared blankly at their intertwined hands. Ivy asked who I was. Vance lifted his eyelids slightly and took a casual puff of his cigarette, a little thing sent by someone else. I thought it was interesting and kept it for fun. Ivy covered her mouth and laughed. When I opened the door just now, I thought it was Aurora. Vance's smile was faint. A fake is always a fake. Ivy came to deliver a document. Before leaving, she smiled meaningfully at me. You look a lot like my good friend. As soon as Ivy left, Vance immediately extinguished his cigarette and strode into the bathroom. The sound of running water didn't stop. He didn't come out until half an hour later. His hair was wet, and there were water stains all over his face. He looked embarrassed and fierce. I stood there like a fool. My throat was so dry that it felt like I had swallowed a lead block. And it hurt. Is your fiancée Ivy? I had never imagined that the two people I'd rusted the most would betray me at the same time in the future. Vance took out another cigarette. But for some reason, his hands were shaking violently. He pressed the lighter several times but couldn't make a fire. He simply threw away the cigarette. Aurora. How old are you this year? 17. I replied in a daze. Vance smiled and raised his hand to press his forehead. You're really a child. In a few years, you'll know how important money is. Being with Ivy, I can save 20 years of hard work. These are things you can't give me. He was calm and composed, and there was no trace of reluctance in his tone. I should have cursed him out loud, but I opened my mouth and couldn't say a word. I knew Vance when he was 10. He came to the orphanage to see me and secretly stuffed the sweetest piece of chocolate into my mouth. I knew Vance when he was 15. He ran all over the northern city to find the old man who sold popcorn for my birthday. I knew Vance when he was 19. He rented a kitchen with all the money he earned from his part-time job and cooked different dishes for me 3 times a day. He was so good to me that I couldn't believe he would leave me. But only. I don't know Vance at the age of 29. He looked down at me. I will arrange a new identity for you. As for the past 10-odd years, just consider it a dream. If I could. I hope that this moment is a ridiculous dream. Vance had been sitting on the sofa in silence. But when a phone call came, his face immediately changed. I had never seen him look so flustered. He stumbled and almost tripped over the coffee table. I'm going to the hospital now. You come with me, he said forcefully as he grabbed my arm. Vance took me to a high-end private hospital, which was in chaos at this time. Vance didn't even have time to take care of me. As soon as he got out of the car, he rushed towards the ward. And nurses were whispering, saying that a brain-dead patient had disappeared from the hospital. It was as if the patient had evaporated into thin air. And even the surveillance couldn't find out the reason. Surely the patient didn't run away by himself. Right? How is that possible? That's a brain-dead patient. He's been lying there for so many years. How could he disappear all of a sudden? I quickly stopped them. Sister nurse, could you tell me what the name of that brain-dead patient is? The nurse turned her head and looked at me. And suddenly screamed, a ghost. I silently retracted my hand and caught a glimpse of Ivy not far away from the corner of my eye. The nurse panicked and called Director Liao. She blew at the small dust on her manicure. What are you panicking for? She's not Aurora. Ivy, 10 years later, had an unruly attitude. She pinched my chin and examined me from all angles. And there was a look of disgust in her eyes that I had never seen before. She pushed me away heavily and clapped her hands. Just as disgusting as that person. She threw a bank card over. 3 million. Leave Vance. I looked up in a daze and clearly saw the undisguised possessiveness for Vance in Ivy's eyes. When I first met Ivy, I was being harassed by the hooligans from the next class. Ivy single and Ashen defeated them. She also looked down at me. But her eyes were filled with enthusiasm and kindness. You're welcome. You're Vance's first love. To keep our top student at Lee University from being sad. Of course, I have to help you. You know Vance? She didn't answer, but smiled and helped me up from the ground. My name is Ivy. Can I be friends with you? Looking back now, she had been approaching me with a plan from that moment on. I don't want your money. In a fit of anger, I threw the bank card back directly. The silk dress Ivy was wearing was snagged by the card, creating a run. She raised her high-heeled shoe and was about to kick me. At the critical moment, Vance, who appeared out of nowhere, stood in front of me. Vance. Ivy stamped her foot in frustration. Your little pet is bullying me. Come on. She's only a teenager. Why are you picking on her? He didn't even bother to ask about the whole situation and immediately took the other side. Ivy was still unhappy. She pouted her lips. Why are you keeping a woman who looks so much like Aurora? Have you forgotten how Aurora treated you back then? Stop talking. Vance interrupted her. Pulled me aside. And looked at me coldly as if I were a stranger. I'll ask my assistant to send you back. Don't go out and cause me trouble if you don't have to. Only then did Ivy happily take Vance's arm and leave. After a long time, a middle-aged man in a suit hurried towards me. Hello. I'm Hector, the assistant of President Aurora. The boss asked me to send you back. On the way, Hector drove in silence. I deliberately asked about information on Aurora. His eyes flickered, and he was polite but distant. Sorry. This is the boss's personal matter. I don't know about it. No matter what I asked, he was extremely evasive. Uncle Xion, can I borrow your phone? I want to send a message to Vance. Hector hesitated for a moment. Under my pleading gaze, he still handed me his phone. The mobile phone 10 years later was much smarter than the one 10 years ago. But the way to use the browser was not much different. I quickly typed in the word Aurora. Strangely, the search results were 0. And I couldn't find even a single relevant piece of information. I changed it to Vance. And the home page immediately jumped to Vance's encyclopedia introduction. Vance. Male. 29 years old. President of Changhui Technology Company. He has been on the rich list of the Ishi for 2 consecutive years and is about to get engaged to the daughter of the Asia, Europe Medical Device Group. Vance seems to be an extremely famous figure now. The internet is very keen on reporting his miraculous history of becoming a wealthy man. However, at the very bottom corner of the search results, I saw a title. Digging into the romantic affairs of President Vance of Changhui. The dead first love and the daughter of a wealthy family. Who does Vance truly love more deeply? Somehow, I clicked on it. Hector seemed to sense something. What message do you want to send to the boss? Let me do it. I was startled. Quickly deleted the browsing history. And closed the phone. It's nothing. We're almost there. Vance came back earlier than I did. He was sitting cross-legged in front of the sofa. Working in his home clothes. With a thin blanket covering the lower part of his body. Making him look a bit softer. However, when he saw me, his gaze turned cold again. There's still some lunch left on the dining table. I walked wordlessly to the table and sat down. There was still steaming rice on the table, along with 3 home-cooked dishes. Hector whispered something in Vance's ear. Vance glanced at me and nodded. I see. You can go back to the company. There were clearly 2 people in the room. But even the air felt cold and heavy. I took a bite of the loofah. It was a familiar taste. Did you cook these yourself? He said coldly. I'm not used to the food outside. What a coincidence. A month ago, I ended up in the hospital with vomiting and diarrhea after eating the fried rice from a fly-infested restaurant. The doctor said it was acute gastroenteritis and told me to have a light diet and not to eat random things outside anymore. Since then, Vance has been in charge of all my 3 meals. Because his cooking skills were rusty, the food he cooked was just average. I always lied to him that it was delicious. The taste was as immature as it is now. Could there really be someone who has been cooking for decades but hasn't improved their cooking skills at all? I swallowed a mouthful of rice. The white rice stained with tears was wet and a bit salty. Vance's eyes were fixed on the computer screen. Wash the dishes after you're done eating. Okay. I still slept in Vance's bedroom. In the middle of the night, I walked out of the room with a water glass in my hand. Vance had fallen asleep on the sofa. Most men at his age would be overweight, but Vance was very thin. Eamon, over 1.8 meters tall, was curled up awkwardly on the small sofa. Looking a bit pitiful. I crouched down carefully. Just as my fingers touched him, Vance woke up. In the dark. The cold light in his eyes shot straight at me. What are you doing so late? He turned on the light and immediately saw the hand gripping his pant leg. You're not even an adult. But you got some nerve. I ignored the sarcasm in his tone. Gritted my teeth. And mustered up the courage to lift up his pant leg. The sight in front of me was so stinging that I gasped and fell back onto the ground. Vance's lower legit was a prosthetic leg shining with silver light. I vaguely remembered the news I saw on my phone during the day. The report said that I became the secret lover of a wealthy man for money. When my boyfriend Vance came to find me, I had someone cut off Vance's legs. Did I do that? But how could I possibly treat Vance, who grew up with me, like that? Vance. It wasn't me. Really? Vance raised his eyebrows. Actually, you showed up at just the right time. He grabbed my waist and pulled me into his arms. His burning hot palm moved up along my coccyx in an ambiguous way. What's the fun in playing with a brain-dead person? Of course. It's more interesting to take revenge on a living person. Don't you think so, Aurora? I didn't dare to look up. I was afraid of seeing the hatred in his eyes. And even more afraid of seeing myself, who was completely unfamiliar, in his eyes. Vance gave me a mobile phone and seemed to have left and all the restrictions on me. Except for one thing. I was not allowed to step into his locked study. I still couldn't believe that I would abandon Vance for money. But I searched the internet for a long time and couldn't find any information about me. Even the previous report was suddenly taken down. It was as if there had never been a person named Aurora in the world. Vance made me wash the dishes and mop the floor every day. All the things I used to hate doing the most. Every night. He also ordered me to finish 2 sets of college entrance examination simulation papers before I could go to bed. Ivy never showed up again. It was as if I had gone back to the days before I traveled through time. Except that the Vance in front of me was grumpy and heartless. I could no longer find anyone to act coquettously towards. The first thing I did every day when I saw Vance was to atone for my sins. For that Aurora who I could never possibly be. I buried my head in writing the test paper, wondering what kind of revenge I would face today. Vance suddenly snatched the pen from my hand and threw a cool fabric dress at me. Put it on and accompany me to a party. No. I threw the dress back. I haven't finished the test paper yet. Vance narrowed his eyes. Aurora. Who are you throwing a tantrum at? I picked up the dress from the ground and hung it around my neck. I'll wear it. I'll wear it. Okay? The pure white suspender dress only reached to the top of my thighs. Looking at my exposed legs in the mirror, I felt embarrassed myself. I dawdled to the door. Dressed so coolly and hotly. Vance didn't even give me a proper look. He coldly grabbed my wrist and pulled me outside. I thought he was going to play tricks on me again. But I didn't expect that he really took me to a nightclub. The intoxicating atmosphere of the feasting and revelry was something I had never been exposed to in the past 17 years. As soon as the door of the private room opened, more than a dozen men looked at me in unison. Vance pushed me from behind. Greet them. I grimaced. Hello, uncles. The man wearing gold-rimmed glasses in the middle of the private room was taken aback and let out a laugh from his throat. Vance. This little girl is kinda cute. No wonder you've been keeping her as a treasure and didn't want to show her to us. Dean Liao. You're exaggerating. She's just a worthless thing. Dean Liao? I looked at him carefully for a moment and found that he looked somewhat similar to Ivy. The man called Dean Liao raised his hand, and the waiter opened 2 bottles of wine and pushed them in front of Vance. Because of the postponed wedding, Ivy is very unhappy. I can't just watch my sister be sad, can I? Either you drink, or this little friend you brought drinks. You choose. I finally understood the purpose of Vance bringing me here today. It turned out that he wanted to apologize to his future brother-in-law. As soon as Vance's hand touched the wine glass, I slapped it away. I'll drink. I grabbed the wine bottle and took a big gulp. The liquid burned all the way down my throat, and my whole stomach ached. Vance looked at me with an unreadable expression. Until I burped and picked up the second bottle of wine. Vance held down my arm. Enough. The so-called Dean Liao shook his wine glass with a smile. Vance. I think this little girl is really sincere towards you. Why are you so indifferent? If you don't like her, how about giving her to me? I raised my drunken eyes and saw Vance's Adam's apple move slightly. He said, okay. I don't know if Vance still remembers. Today is my birthday. After drinking a bottle of strong liquor, I was so drunk that I couldn't tell which way was up or down. I lay slumped in the corner. I felt so sick that I wanted to vomit. And I also felt like crying. I was like a cheap toy. With just a few words, Vance didn't hesitate to promise to send me to the Liao family in 3 days. After the drinking party ended, Vance carried me on his back out of the private room. When I first met Vance 10 years later, I thought he was very powerful. So powerful that he had no flaws. But now, lying on his back, I could clearly feel that his 2 legs were taking steps of different depths. And his thin back only had the shoulder blades that were poking into me. Vance's steps suddenly stopped. He turned his head to look at me. His expression as cold as ever. Why are you crying? I've already said that I'll take revenge on you severely. It's too late to be afraid now. I wiped away my tears and hugged his neck tightly. If I go to the Liao family, will they return the current Aurora to me? Vance's body suddenly tensed up. It's actually not hard to guess. Who else could quietly take away a brain-dead patient except the Liao siblings who controlled the hospital? It's fine. It's fine. I forced a smile and said, is this considered saving myself? Vance tightened his arm and didn't say anything. Under the influence of alcohol, I soon fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up again, I was on a plane. In the empty first-class cabin. The only person I saw was Hector. My head ached terribly from the hangover. I rubbed my sore and swollen eyes and said, didn't you say you would send me to the Liao family in 3 days? It's only the second day. Hector was silent and then said, Miss Aurora. The boss has already picked up Ms. Aurora. Hector seemed a bit reluctant and gently averted his gaze. You no longer have any value. So there's no need to keep you around to be an eyesore. Those are the boss's exact words. He took out a large number of documents from his bag. On the brand new ID card was printed my photo, and the name on it was Aurora. Vance always keeps his word. He arranged a new identity for me. But he wouldn't allow me to return to our home country. I saw the news of his engagement to Ivy on TV. He was wearing a tailcoat and dancing with Ivy. And the smile in his eyes was so warm that it could melt ice. Hector earnestly moved a chair and sat in front of me, saying, I've arranged a school for you. You can start going to school tomorrow. Vance has lost a lot of weight. These 2 sentences that didn't seem to be related made Hector stunned for a moment. He nodded awkwardly and said, the boss is personally preparing for the wedding. Maybe he's tired. Can I go back to our home country and take a look? No. You can't. Moreover, Vance wouldn't answer any of the calls I made. Across mountains and seas. I could only get a little bit of news about Vance from the square screen. I started secretly working part-time at a restaurant after school. I should thank Vance for his revenge. Which made me proficient in life skills like washing dishes and mopping the floor. When I was tired, I felt a little regretful. I thought it would have been better if I had accepted Ivy's card at that time. The news that the daughter of the Asia-Europe medical group got married spread throughout the overseas Chinese forum. And everyone was envious of which young man was so lucky. The next day, having fulfilled Vance, the front pages of domestic news were all reporting the same thing. The new son-in-law reported the Asia-Europe group for tax evasion, illegal trading of human organs, and producing illegal medical devices below the industry standards under his real name. On the same day, the person in charge of the Asia-Europe group was taken away by the police for interrogation. And the news caused a great stir. Some people said that this son-in-law was a great hero who sacrificed his family interests for justice and removed harm for the people. Others said that sending his own relatives to prison showed that this man had a very cruel heart. Some even speculated that due to an even distribution of interests, the new son-in-law became an informer out of anger. Vance's reputation plummeted in the circle. I used the money I earned from my part-time job to buy a plane ticket back to our home country. I had a dream on the plane. When Ivy was 18 years old, she invited me to her home as a guest. There were a lot of guests at her home that day. After giving my gift, I planned to leave. But I was covered my mouth by a strange man and dragged into a room. There was tearing, beating, and abuse. Ivy opened the door with her friends and saw me in a state of undress. I was crying and almost fainted. I grabbed Ivy's hand and begged her to call the police for me. She hugged me affectionately, bathed me, cleaned my body and wounds, and comforted me who was helpless and frightened. She went to the hospital with the police to do an injury identification for me. It was the hospital run by Ivy's family. Aurora. The report will take a long time. Now that the truth hasn't come out. How are you going to face Vance when you go back? I was in a mess and my expression was dull. Ivy said in a difficult tone. Some classmates saw you take the initiative to enter that man's room. Will they talk nonsense to Vance? I shook my head and my tears fell even more fiercely. Vance won't not believe me. I see. Ivy held my hand more tightly. But Vance will definitely be very feel sorry for. If you go back like this. Listen to me. Rest in the apartment I rented for a few days. Don't be afraid. I'll sleep with you at night and ensure that such a thing won't happen again. Ivy was my best friend. So I agreed without thinking. But I didn't expect such a nightmare to happen later. I lived in the cave of the devil. Ivy trapped me in the room. She had people tie me up with ropes, and inject me with one tub of medicine after another in my arm. She contemptuously pulled my hair and said, "Don't they say that children raised in orphanages are all very smart? Why are you so stupid, Aurora?" 3 teenagers emerged from behind her. They were exactly the little hooligans from the neighboring class who had made things difficult for me at school. In an instant, I understood everything. Ivy sneered. "You don't seriously think that I would be friends with the bastard, do you? Clearly. I'm prettier and more excellent than you. Why has Vance only ever had eyes for you? You're so stupid. You were still thinking about calling the police? Do you think the people who took your statement that day were really the police?" As the medicine took effect, in the moment before I closed my eyes, I saw Ivy kick one of the hooligans and say, "Haven't you been secretly in love with her for a long time? I'm giving you a chance today. Just don't kill her." Ivy was jealous and hateful towards me, making me taste the feeling of being worse than dead. My arms were full of needle holes. I was forced to take a lot of unknown medicines every day. Sometimes I felt light as a feather. And sometimes I felt as if there were thousands of ants biting me all over my body. In those dark days, I was awake for very little time. Later, I even had hallucinations. Ivy gave me to the man who had insulted me that day. She leaned close to my ear and said, "An orphan can just die. Who will care?" Ivy's sharp voice seemed to be right in my ear. I woke up from my dream in a cold sweat. And my back was soaked. Outside the window was the clear blue sky of the airport. I didn't even have time to get my backpack. I just wanted to see Vance as soon as possible. But he wasn't at home. It seemed that no one had lived here for a long time. There was a thick layer of dust on the table. The door of the study was slightly closed and not locked. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, I hesitated. Vance said that I was prohibited from entering his study. I caught the earliest flight in the early morning and came back. I didn't have breakfast and was also hungry for lunch. Hector pushed the door open panting. When he saw me, he let out a sigh of relief. He said into the phone, "Boss, having so silver and session. I found Miss Aurora. She's at home." "Okay. Don't worry. I'll take good care of her." I reached out and snatched his phone, saying, "Vance, I want to see you." On the phone, Vance's breathing was very light. He said in a tone without any ups and downs, "But I don't want to see you again." I clenched the phone tightly, and tears welled up in my eyes involuntarily. "Vance, I saw the examination report you hid in the car. You had advanced gastric cancer half a year ago. That's why he had been getting thinner and thinner. He had a low fever every day and his body was burning hot. Vance hid it from me. And I also pretended not to know. I just wanted to see him, stay with him, and do more things for him." There was a long silence on the phone. Vance let out a soft sigh and said, "Since you know that I don't have much time left, please don't bother me anymore." I couldn't wait to tell him everything I had dreamed about. I wanted to tell him that no matter which Aurora it was, she had never abandoned Vance. How could I be willing to hurt the young man who had protected me and watched me grow up? Vance interrupted me mercilessly. "So what's the point of you saying all this?" He ignored me and was as mean as he had been in the previous days. "No matter what happened in these 10 years. It's a matter between me and Aurora. It has nothing to do with you. But I am Aurora. You're not." Vance's voice was calm and indifferent. "The Aurora I loved and hated is the one who is already brain dead. You are Aurora. But you can only be Aurora." These words completely pushed me to the bottom. Meeting again at the wrong time. The 17-year-old Aurora and the 29-year-old Vance were strangers. Moonlight from the moment he allowed Ivy to get close, and watched as a pair of hands turned from white to black. Vance knew that he could never go back. But before he rotted and decayed, he had to avenge Aurora. No one knew better than him how kind the girl was who stood timidly in the corner of the orphanage and didn't even dare to fight for a piece of candy. He had never believed that Aurora would abandon him for money, even though his legs were disabled because of her. Later, he found Aurora covered in blood in the rainy night. He carried her onto the wheelchair. Her mouth was full of blood blisters, and she was nestling in Vance's arms. On the verge of death, she said, "Hate me, I'm sorry for you. Even though she admitted it herself, Vance still didn't believe it. Lying low for 8 years, he retaliated against those who had tortured Aurora in kind. Only Ivy, the chief culprit, was left. Vance had a lot of evidence, but he never took action. Ivy's brother was conducting an experiment. If the experiment was successful, maybe it could make Aurora wake up again. Vance also knew how ridiculous he was, actually believing that a brain-dead patient could come back to life. But he had no other choice. Even more, he was so crazy that he pinned his hopes on the ways of gods and ghosts. He pasted all kinds of talismans in the study, copied one Buddhist scripture after another by hand, and even let out his blood to make medicine. He despised himself for being so stupid. But if she could open her eyes, what did all these things matter? How should he describe the first sight of the 17-year-old Aurora? His heart ached densely. And at the same time, there was a joy that seemed to break through the ground. Vance thought regretfully, why did she have to appear at this moment, when he was about to die and had no ability to protect her? The Liao family had their eyes on her. His Aurora was such an understanding girl. Knowing that he was in a dilemma, it seemed that in order not to make things difficult for him, she disappeared. She wasn't taken away by the Liao family. On that night at the nightclub, it was just to make the 17-year-old girl hate him a little more. Even though he knew she was innocent, Vance still accused Aurora of betraying him. Otherwise, what else could he say? The torture and pain that Aurora suffered, even if described in words, were beyond the bearing of a 17-year-old innocent and carefree girl. So it was better to let her be wronged and resentful. But she seemed to have an innate understanding and a compassion to sacrifice herself for others. She happily said that she was willing to exchange herself to bring Aurora back. When he carried the sleeping her onto the plane, Vance couldn't help pinching her cheek for the last time and said, "Silly girl. Happy birthday." Vance was half leaning on the hospital bed. His body was so weak that he had to wear an oxygen mask to have the strength to speak. Hector sat beside him and wrote down every instruction from the boss in the notebook. Clean up all his traces of life. Don't let Aurora find out the existence of the study. Cremate him and scatter his ashes at sea. There's no need to leave a tombstone for people to pay their respects. Buy an apartment with strict security near the school. Buy a bunch of fresh lilies for Aurora during the college entrance examination. Vance suddenly called out to him, and a smile appeared on his pale and thin face. Forget it. If I send lilies, she'll figure out it's from me. Send sunflowers instead. Hector wrote it down again. Send fresh sunflowers to Aurora. After writing it down, Hector thought for a moment. Miss Aurora said she wants to study medicine in the future. Vance was taken aback for a moment. Studying medicine is not good. She's very timid. After a moment of distraction, Vance smiled again. She has excellent English grades. You should praise her more. Hector wrote down a lot of things. For example, when Aurora is in a relationship, he should investigate whether the other person's character is reliable. What about when she gets married? Do we need to give Miss Aurora a gift when she gets married? Getting married? Huh. Vance rubbed his little finger and said softly. Don't send anything. Just disappear from her life. There shouldn't be even the slightest trace of him in her beautiful future. Hector looked at his boss's smile and felt extremely sad. Are you really not going to see Miss Aurora one last time? Vance tilted his head and saw his own emaciated figure in the mirror. There's no need. Facing the sun, Vance's funeral was simple. It was on a rainy morning. I squatted at the entrance of the funeral parlor for a long time and watched as Hector walked out holding a lifeless box. He shook his head and looked at me. Aurora, don't put me in a difficult position. The boss instructed that you're not allowed to attend his funeral. Where is the cemetery? He still shook his head. Sorry. Even after death, Vance didn't want me to get close to him. However, he strangely enough gave all his wealth to me. The lawyer came to the door with the will and carefully checked my documents. Ms. Aurora. Mr. Vance left you a large fortune. May I ask, what's the relationship between the two of you? I looked down at Vance's signature at the end of the will. I was stunned. Miss Aurora is our boss's legally legitimate niece. Hector explained patiently. The boss said that he doesn't have many relatives or friends. Instead of donating this money to a charity organization, it's better to give it to you. At least you're someone he knows well. I lowered my head. And Vance's ID photo had already been soaked by my tears. In his eyes, was I just someone he knew well? The lawyer left with the documents. The movers also arrived. I sat on the ground, and the more I wiped my tears, the more they flowed. Hector seemed to feel sorry for me and helped me onto the sofa. Aurora, the boss has already sold this house and arranged another place for you to live. The workers were quick and efficient. In less than half an hour, the living room and the bedroom were all cleared out. Two men wearing gloves smiled at me. Miss, smiled at me. Please stand aside for a while. We're going to carry the sofa out too. Where are you going to move these things? The worker scratched his head naively. The boss told us to throw them into the garbage recycling station. But I think these things are still quite new. So I want to take them home and use them myself. Can I buy them from you? Miss Aurora. Hector frowned and shook his head in disapproval. This is the boss's final wish. I hope you can respect it. His tone was as if I were a child making unreasonable demands. But this was Vance's sofa. Vance would sit here and work. At night, he would lie on the sofa and sleep, with his long legs curled up uncomfortably. Hector, can you leave it to me? Miss Aurora. He hesitated. I wiped my tears randomly. I see. Just pretend I didn't say anything. The noise in the room gradually subsided. I watched as the workers carried out all kinds of furniture. The room became empty in an instant. It seemed that Vance was determined to erase all the traces of his life. Hector finally carried out a cardboard box half a person's height from the study. It was filled with Vance's work supplies. He squatted in front of me and let out a soft sigh. Miss Aurora. Although I don't know why the boss did this, I believe that making you sad wasn't his intention. I was crying so hard that I couldn't catch my breath and didn't listen to his words at all. Until a cold laptop was placed beside my hand. I've deleted all the important files in it. If you want to keep something as a memento, Miss Aurora, you can keep this. I looked up in disbelief. And Hector had already shifted his gaze elsewhere. Thank you. I carefully hugged the laptop to my chest. This was the last thing Vance left me. Even though he himself wasn't willing. Just as Hector said. He had cleaned the computer thoroughly. And there was no longer any trace that Vance had used it. Ivy and her brother were sent to prison. With multiple crimes combined, they were sentenced to more than 30 years in prison. The Asia-Europe group declined. And the black-hearted industries in the medical field were also uprooted along with it. I moved to a one-bedroom apartment with tight security. I bought an identical sofa. Every night, I read books, memorized words, and slept on the sofa. When I woke up and touched the remaining warmth on the sofa, it always gave me the illusion that Vance hadn't left. He slowly lifted the thin blanket covering his body, stretched his limbs that had been curled up all night with a bit of pain, and asked me expressionlessly what I wanted for breakfast. Vance. I pushed the plate towards the empty seat opposite. I can make tomato and egg noodles by myself now. I'm amazing. Right? On the 89th day after Vance left, I missed the morning reading class again because of my emotional outburst. During the college entrance examination, while everyone was writing furiously, I stopped my pen when I saw the English composition topic. The composition topic was, please describe your dream home to your pen pal Tom. The chaotic and reversed memories suddenly engraved themselves frame by frame into the depths of my mind. I walked out of the examination room humming a tune with my exam preparation bag in hand. Vance, who had been waiting outside the examination site, smiled and opened an umbrella for me, and handed me an ice cream that was still cold. I didn't have time to eat it. I put my hands on my hips proudly. Vance. Wait and see me get a full score in English. I couldn't wait to share with him. Do you know what the English composition topic is? Describe your dream home. My goodness. This question is completely tailored for me. I guarantee that I wrote it brilliantly, and there isn't a single grammatical error. Okay. Eat the ice cream first. It's about to melt. Vance wiped the fine sweat off the tip of my nose and asked with a smile. So what's your dream home like? First of all, it must be very big. There should be a dressing table with a huge pink bow. The closet should be filled with all kinds of designer clothes. And there should be all my favorite dolls in the closet. And this is my private space. And you stinky man, are not allowed to go in. I waved my hands and gestured animatively. Vance lowered his head and listened carefully. And even thought about it seriously for a while. I felt a bit embarrassed. Is my taste too tacky? He touched my head. It doesn't matter. If you don't like it, you can redecorate it later. It was the height of summer. Everyone who had been waiting outside the examination room for a long time was sweating profusely. But Vance was fresh and clean. I leaned over to his neck and sniffed hard. I could still smell the faint scent of mint and pomelo body wash. Vance, did you slack off? You just came to pick me up, right? When I got close, Vance was already stiff all over. Hearing what I said, he gently pinched my cheek and smiled in a half-angry way. I don't want to be the stinky man you dislike. So I took 2 showers and changed 3 sets of clothes this afternoon. Are you satisfied? I stuck out my tongue and angrily dodged his attack of pinching my cheek. Examinee number 21? What's wrong with examinee number 21? The invigilator's voice came. I raised my head in a daze and found that my face was covered with tears. The invigilator was taken aback for a moment and said seriously, examinees are not allowed to do anything unrelated to the exam. I closed my eyes and raised my hand to indicate that I wanted to hand in the paper early. When I walked out of the examination room, it was a sunny day when I went in. But now it was raining. No one was waiting for me. There was no ice cream. No umbrella. It was completely different from what was in my memory. There must be one of the 2 memories that is false. So that I can comfort myself that nothing has changed. I can still go on with my original life. But all of it is true. On the day the college entrance examination results came out, Hector called. He was stunned for a few seconds and then slowly asked me, didn't you perform well in English? In the English score column, it clearly said, 130 points. Yeah. I suddenly felt unwell and handed in the paper early. I didn't tell him that I only wrote 1 sentence in the composition. I want him to appear in my room. Hector didn't say anything. But I dialed his number again. I want to ask, was that pink room prepared by Vance for Aurora? There was no sound on the phone. Hector, there shouldn't be anything that can't be said about this. Right? After a long time, I finally heard the answer. Yes. The boss decorated it himself. After it was decorated, he never went in himself. I asked, which year was it? 5 years ago. The 2nd year after Aurora's brain death. I bit my wrist to keep myself from crying out loud. Vance is a liar. Vance. You're a big liar. When filling out the college entrance examination volunteer form, I stubbornly chose clinical medicine. Hector was absolutely right. I'm scared when I see all kinds of organs soaked in formalin. My hands tremble when I inject experimental drugs into mice. I vomit continuously after dissecting a live rabbit. But I persevered. At the age of 21, it was the graduation season. I was recommended for postgraduate study at the School of Medicine at Peking University. Hector came to congratulate me with his wife. They were holding a large bouquet of beautiful sunflowers in their hands. I never thought that such a crying girl would be brave enough to study medicine. If the boss knew about it. He stopped abruptly. I smiled and continued. If he knew, I'd definitely give him a couple of injections no matter what. Both of them were amused by me. After seeing Hector off, I sat down on the bench holding the sunflowers. Vance. I'm going to pursue a postgraduate degree. My research direction is cancer cells and targeted effects. How great it would be if you were still alive. Maybe I'd really get the chance to give you a couple of injections. I'm very busy every day. But whenever I hear the latest research results on cancer from all over the world, I feel that everything is worth it. When I see those emaciated patients in the ward, I always think of Vance suddenly. Then, headens a Fountain I became the resident doctor who cried the most in the department. I'm a lone wolf, devoting myself wholeheartedly to medicine. After finding out that the director and the head nurse intended to introduce a boyfriend to me, I put on a diamond ring I bought from a Tenuan boutique store. Does Aurora have a boyfriend? When did that happen? I smiled. In high school. Why have we never seen him? I slowly twirled the ring. He's busy decorating our new home. Gradually, Everyone also learned that I had a mysterious boyfriend. By chance, I assisted the director in revising the latest academic paper. The computer at hand broke down, and the paper needed to be sent to the director urgently. I had to open that laptop. For all these years, I had always placed it beside my pillow and never opened it. I always felt that every time I opened it, a bit of Vance's aura would fade away. The laptop that hadn't been used for a long time was a bit sluggish. When I opened Word and was about to create a new document out of habit, my gaze suddenly caught a glimpse of the upper left corner. Do you want to recover the following unsaved documents? Among a list of unfamiliar files, I saw my name. The last letter to Aurora. My heart suddenly contracted, and my palm holding the mouse started to sweat. Only at this moment did I realize that I wasn't as brave as Hector had said. I dared to hold a scalpel, but I didn't dare to read a letter written several years ago. Aurora, have you finished revising the paper? The director just urged us in the group. A colleague suddenly pushed the door open. My hand trembled, and I instinctively clicked on Recover Document. The words filling the screen seemed to be breathing, robbing all the air around me. The last letter to Aurora. This should be the last thing I can leave for you. I'm sorry for making the 17-year-older Aurora bear the hardships of the 20-year-older Aurora. I'm sorry for making you disappointed in me and feel indebted to me. In fact, you never had to feel guilty towards me because of the past you didn't know about. I know what kind of girl Aurora is. I will always believe in you unwaveringly. I avenged you. But when I saw you lying on the cold hospital bed and heard the doctor declare you brain dead, apart from hating you, I seemed unable to find a reason to live. I know that saving a brain-dead patient is almost an impossible task in modern medicine. But what if there is even a glimmer of hope? I want you to wake up. At all costs. Until you, the 17-year-old you, appeared. You, who are healthy and full of vitality. At that time, I was in great pain. Why did you appear in front of me now? Precisely at a time when I didn't have much time left to live. I don't have the opportunity to teach the 17-year-older Aurora to grow up again. Perhaps on the night when the doctor declared you brain dead, I had already lost you. You are Aurora now. And you can only be Aurora. An Aurora who hasn't been hurt and has infinite possibilities in the future. Whether it's the boyfriend or Uncle Vance, they should both die in your memory. If you can't forget, and try to hate. Hatred is a kind of strength. You will always grow up, and then you will find that Vance is just an ordinary person. And the years spent embracing him are just an insignificant and dispensable memory. Live towards the sun. Aurora. I held the computer and burst into tears. 8 years ago, I didn't receive this letter. My colleague asked me in surprise what was wrong, but I ignored him and dialed Hector's number with trembling hands. The letter. Did Vance write a letter to me? There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Yes. The boss did write a letter during his last days and said that I should print it out and hand it to you after he was gone. Why didn't you give it to me? The boss didn't send the letter to me in the end. He seemed to hesitate for a long time, and finally let out a long sigh. The boss said that a dying person doesn't need to leave anything behind for others to remember. Vance not only deceived me, but he was also very cruel. Who allowed you to have plastic surgery to look like this? Hector's voice came out from the receiver. Miss Aurora. Even at the end of his life, the boss was thinking of doing his best to protect you. Please don't blame him. How could I blame him? 8 years. Vance. Did you ever miss me like this too? Clearly, heaven so Ryan sigh. Everyone said that I made you lose everything. If you were willing to believe, would you not have had such a hard life? I held the laptop and cried my heart out. The air was thin, and my vision was blurred. It was as if the divided spaces suddenly twisted and overlapped, constantly compressing my chest. At the last moment before my consciousness faded away, I heard a familiar voice ringing in my ear. This is the world 10 years later that you wanted to see. You will die, and the person you love will also die. Do you want to save him? Do you want to restart your life? Bind to the system. Fix the bugs in the quick transmogrification world, and everything has a chance to be rewritten. Have you decided? I suddenly remembered why I felt this voice was familiar. When I was 17, I heard the same voice in a dream. It said, "Do you want to see your life 10 years later?" The laptop shattered, and I slid off the chair. Everything in front of me turned to darkness. I choose to bind.